Wild Mouse coasters are commonplace. In fact, off the top of my head, I think there's 5 in the state of California alone. These range from many different manufacturers, i.e. Aerodynamics, Mauer, Mach, and I think there's a couple others. Today though, we are going to review 2 Wild Mouse coasters that are built by the same manufacturer and are very close to each other, but yet are very different. Coast Rider at Knott's Berry Farm and Goofy Sky School at Disney's California Adventure. Both of these coasters are built by Mach Rides, but they're different models. Coast Rider is the bigger park model and it opened in 2013. Goofy Sky School is the smaller model and it opened in 2001. Straight away, we have to talk about what makes Coast Rider different than your traditional Wild Mouse coaster, and that is the restraints, specifically the shin guards. These are uncomfortable, and they definitely hurt your shins by the end of the experience, but there was a specific reason why they were added. A boy tried to get out of the ride before it was over, so in March of 2016, these were added. Other than that, the restraints for these coasters are the same. They consist of tight vehicles with lap bars. The seats are comfortable enough, but in the case of Goofy Sky School, it is near impossible to get in and out of them because you keep your stuff with you during the ride, making it so difficult to get in and out of the ride vehicle. It is doable, but even though I'm pretty skinny and the bag I have isn't crazy big when I'm at Disneyland, it's still hard to get in and out of these ride vehicles. So if you're a larger or taller person, be careful. One other note about the loading process for Goofy Sky School is the fact that they have a moving load station. This is a nice feature and it speeds up operations a little bit. Coast Rider at Knott's does not have this feature. One other difference is the fact that Coast Rider is just plain bigger. It has a decently tall lift and drop before going into the traditional switchbacks. With that, let's start with Coast Rider and go through the layout. Coast Rider starts with a turn out of the station before ascending said lift hill and going down said drop. This drop is decent and the best part of the ride by far. Don't expect airtime or anything here, but it's a nice little plunge to start the experience and it gets your expectations a little too high for the rest of the ride. I do like this drop at the beginning and it gives it one redeeming quality because the rest of the ride, to be completely honest, is terrible. Because it's a Wild Mouse coaster, the main element of Coast Rider is those unbanked switchbacks, which are supposed to provide laterals. Unfortunately though, some of these turns are taken at an almost glacial rate, so you don't get as many laterals as you would get from other Wild Mouse roller coasters. And when the coaster hits a brake run, you could easily hit your shins on the shin guards, which is not a comfortable sensation to say the least. You then have an okay drop, certainly not as good as the first one, and I don't think you'll get airtime here once again. After this fun little drop, you have another brake run, a turn, another drop, another brake run, another turn, and then a few more turns leading into the station. And that ends your experience on Coast Rider. Keep in mind that while the pacing isn't good, there's also a little bit of pain in your legs from those restraints. Luckily, I'm just going to say this right now, Goofy Sky School is a much more enjoyable experience, but we'll get back to Goofy in just a moment. So what should I give Coast Rider for its final score? I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. This is a perfect example of how you take a solid family coaster and turn it into one of my least favorite roller coasters. I'm sorry to be blunt and a little bit negative, but this is just not a very good ride. As of this recording, Knott's Berry Farm is my favorite theme park I visited, but Coast Rider is for sure not the reason why. As for Goofy Sky School, well, here we're looking at a much more fun ride. This coaster is located at Disney's California Adventure, just 15 minutes away from Knott's Berry Farm. Though, of course, it opened 12 years before Coast Rider, as I said in the beginning. I also wanted to come back to a comment I made earlier about this being the small park model. That is true, but it's also slightly modified, making it come up on RCDB as a custom Wild Mouse. So what Disney did here is they made a couple of the drops less steep. Personally, I kind of wish they hadn't done this, but even with that, the ride is fun. Goofy Sky School originally opened as Mulholland Madness, but with the Pixar Pier retheme, it has since been rethemed to Goofy Sky School. Speaking of, there's actually a surprising amount of theming for a Wild Mouse coaster. Of course, this shouldn't be a surprise at a Disney park, even Incredicoaster across the lake has great theming too. As the name suggests, Goofy is teaching you how to fly, and of course, he's one of the worst possible people that could be teaching you to fly, but there's cool little signs throughout like how to take off, how to dive, how to turn, those types of things. For not having much space to work with, they did a great job. As for the layout itself, it's your standard Mach Wild Mouse coaster. You have a lift followed by a bunch of unbanked turns that give great laterals, unlike Coast Rider might I add, and you really do feel like you're going to fly off the track. It's fun. Also, you get a great view of the Grand Californian on a couple of these turns, and if your room's in the right spot and someone is in your room, you can wave to them, which we did a few years ago. So that was a fun little memory. After an absolutely brutal turn, you reach the ride's main drop. This isn't very big, but it does provide a nice stomach-dropping sensation. And presuming the brake run didn't activate right before the drop, you should come into this plunge with some pretty decent speed. Then on most Mack Wild Mouse coasters, you'd have an airtime hill before the brake run, but on Goofy Sky School, you just have an elevated section after a small little drop, so that's one of the sections they modified. From here, you hit the brakes. It's a pretty short ride, as most Wild Mouse coasters are, but it's fun. And watch out for that brake run, it's a doozy. Now, what would I give Goofy Sky School? I'm going to give this coaster a 7.5 out of 10. I always feel like we ride this coaster a bunch when we're at DCA. Maybe it's just because we typically rope drop the pier, so if we want to, we could do 3, 4, even 5 rides in a row. We actually did do a 4-ride marathon a few years ago. It's certainly not the best ride in the park or anything, but it's a lot more fun than Coast Rider. And while I typically enjoy Wild Mouse coasters, it looks like Coast Rider is just one of the worst ones out there. So, moral of the story, shin guards on roller coasters are no bueno.